Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our
Taurus.
And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Please like the stream and subscribe to Tochnyi for more updates. We have an excellent broadcast for you this week. We have three segments. We're going to have first the news segment as read by myself. That'll be followed by a segment from our economics contributor, Ben, which is a pre-recorded segment he did for us. And finally, we'll have a question and answer kind of open discussion about some other things that happened this week. So without any further delay, I will jump right into the news. So first item. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on Tuesday to discuss efforts to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky praised Saudi Arabia's role in seeking a solution to the conflict. According from a statement from Zelensky's office, they talked about Ukraine's peace formula for ending the war, and Zelensky thanked the Crown Prince for his advice on accelerating the implementation. Zelensky and the Crown Prince also discussed a potential peace summit that Switzerland agreed to host later this year. Zelensky was quoted as saying they share an interest in ensuring global stability. The Saudi state media later said the Crown Prince affirmed Saudi Arabia's commitment to supporting international efforts to resolve what they called the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and that Zelensky left Saudi Arabia shortly after the meeting. Earlier, Zelensky had written that they are very close to holding the first peace summit and that he counts on Saudi Arabia's continued support and presence at the conference. He said he was confident that the meeting would yield results regarding prisoner swaps between Ukraine and Russia, as Saudi Arabia has mediated exchanges in the past. One of the preparatory meetings for the proposed peace summits took place in Saudi Arabia last August. Next item. Also on Tuesday, the National Resistance Center of Ukraine, a government entity, reported that Ukrainian guerrilla forces had destroyed a local office of President Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party in Novokhovka, a city in the Kherson region currently under Russian occupation. The action was part of an effort to disrupt the pseudo-electoral process in the city amid preparations for Russia's presidential elections in March, according to the center, which is operated by Ukraine's Special Operations Forces. The organization urged Ukrainians living in Russian-occupied areas to abstain from participating in the forthcoming Russian presidential vote and caution that individuals aiding in the organization of this so-called election process would face consequences for their involvement. Marina Zakharovka, the so-called leader of Kherson's Russian-installed electoral commission, or so-called electoral commission, sorry, there's a lot of so-calleds when you're dealing with Russia, stated in a video message that the attack, which she labeled a terrorist act by Ukraine, resulted in damage to the electoral commission's facilities in Novokhovka. She highlighted the attack coincided with the start of early voting and presidential elections, and that this is near a military engagement line. Zakharova also mentioned that this was not an isolated attempt and that there was an incident also near Holopristyanki in the direction of Kherson. Furthermore, Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-appointed so-called leader of the Kherson Regional Administration, acknowledged the strikes, calling them drone strikes, although the Ukrainian forces called them guerrilla actions or partisan actions. So there's some dispute. Russia doesn't seem to want to admit that there's internal problems with their so-called electoral situation, right? In a statement on Twitter, the representative of the European Commission asserted that the EU will never recognize the so-called elections in the occupied territories. He stated that Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk are all Ukraine, and that all those involved in the false elections will be held to account. The controversial elections in Russia are set for, or so-called elections are set for March 17th. However, this year does mark a change with the election calendar extending over 3 days, the 15th to the 17th of March. And in the Russian-occupied areas, they commenced the voting earlier than was announced and planned. In other words, they sort of just did this quickly, I assume probably to avoid security problems. In response to these developments, the leaders of the G7, also following their summit on the 24th of February, collectively agreed not to accept the legitimacy of Russia's so-called elections in the occupied territories. Next item. On March 1st, 2024, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, visited Kyiv, Ukraine, and this culminated in the signing of a significant bilateral security deal similar to agreements signed by the UK and France. The Netherlands also has committed to assisting Ukraine in the funding of the supply of the 800,000 artillery shells that has been mentioned by various European countries this month. In 2024, the Netherlands has markedly escalated its military and humanitarian support for Ukraine. These efforts include a pledge to provide Patriot air defense missiles and supporting the acquiring of patrol boats, as well as F-16 fighter jets and training, a coalition that they lead in partnership with Denmark and other countries. The Dutch government has allocated an additional 2 billion, approximately 2.2 billion USD, sorry, 2 billion euros, which is 2.2 billion USD, for military aid in 2024. And that's aimed at addressing Ukraine's ammunition needs, maintaining delivered systems, and strengthening air defense. This package is part of a broader support initiative, including 102 million euros allocated for humanitarian aid and pressing needs to assist Ukraine through the winter and also into spring. The military aid will be delivered through commercial procurement, stockpile supplies, and international cooperation. Next item. The latest armored combat vehicle from the Ukrainian defense company Ingwar, known as the Ingwar 3, has been revealed. Ingwar describes the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, or MRAP, as a light tactical vehicle designed for versatility across different terrain. The company highlights that the development of this state-of-the-art vehicle involved in collaboration with Ukraine's special forces, and it was also guided by wartime necessities. Featuring an innovative monocoque or unibody design, had to look up what monocoque meant, the Ingwar 3 is offered in various configurations and is available in both 4x4 and 6x6 chassis options, tailored to address both urban and off-road challenges. Ingwar emphasizes the Ingwar 3's performance as well as its sustainable operational capacity for tasks ranging from escort and reconnaissance missions to rapid response operation. The armored vehicle is powered by a 356 horsepower Deutz engine and is equipped with multiple cameras and night vision capabilities. Its steel and aluminum armor strike a balance between crew protection and weight considerations. In zones like Ukraine, characterized by extensive minefields, MRAPs have become indispensable. However, until this time, Ukraine has primarily relied on Western donated models like the US manufactured Max Pro. Ukrainian soldiers have praised these MRAP vehicles for being nearly indestructible, recounting instances where they withstood heavy attacks and protected passengers effectively. So the Ukrainians have highly rated the effectiveness of MRAPs, and they are now producing their own, the Ingwar 3, which is great news. Next item. According to an intelligence update from the UK Ministry of Defense on Saturday, Russia has likely halted operations of its A-50 warning and control aircraft following the second loss of an A-50 in 2 months. The UK department stated that the fleet is expected to remain grounded while internal investigations ascertain the causes and losses and how Russia can enhance its capabilities against Ukrainian air defense. The A-50 serves as an airborne radar system detecting enemy aircraft, missiles, and air defense systems, while also providing command and control for Russian air operations and identifying ground targets. Prior to these incidents, Russia was believed to possess only approximately 8 modernized versions of these costly aircraft, each valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Justin Bronk, an air warfare specialist at the United Royal Services Institute, remarked to the BBC that losing an A-50, along with its specialized crew of 15 members, would be a significant and a major source of embarrassment for the Russian Air Force. The UK department noted that the absence of these planes from the airspace likely diminishes the overall situational awareness of Russian air crews. With the total loss of 3 A-50 aircraft during the full-scale invasion, Russia may need to explore alternative strategies such as repurposing their existing outdated A-50 aircraft or assuming higher risk to provide the necessary air coverage for ground forces. This is, again, according to the UK assessment. Furthermore, Russia might consider bringing previously decommissioned A-50 airframes back into service. Recent reports indicate Ukraine's success in downing other Russian warplanes, with claims of around a dozen such incidents in the past month alone, and even more as of today. Yuri Ihnat, spokesman for Ukraine's Air Force, stated that the recent destruction of 10 Su-34s and 2 Su-35s was in response to increasingly aggressive Russian aviation presence on the Eastern Front. However, these losses have forced Russian pilots dropping glide bombs to fly at greater distance to protect themselves, resulting in the reduced accuracy of their attacks, as Ihnat explained. So that is the news about that. Next item. So real quick for the B-roll, I had, there was no real video of this. It happened, I think, yesterday. The only one was Peter Zehan, like on a beach, like, hey guys, this happened. But this is coverage of the meeting in Moscow of the Palestinian groups, which Moscow's hosting today or a few days ago. And this is, I assume, like one of the reasons that Israel has changed its stance. So just keep that in mind. Israeli ambassador announced in his UN speech, referring to Ukraine as Israel's allies and friends in need, emphasizing their mutual struggle for survival and Israel's enduring commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. This diplomatic shift marks a significant change in Israeli foreign policy. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Israel has offered more than 100, according to Erdogan, 100 metric tons of humanitarian equipment. Additionally, a field hospital near the Ukrainian border that treated over 7,000 injured individuals, and hundreds of Ukrainian patients received top-quality care after being shipped to Israeli medical facilities. However, Israel so far had refrained from providing military assistance or aligning them with Western sanctions, partly to avoid escalating problems with Russia and Israel. The timing of Israel's announcement coincided with Russia hosting an intra-Palestinian meeting in Moscow. Representatives from Hamas and Islamic Jihad were invited to foster political unity among Palestinian factions, while acknowledging Russia's involvement in regional affairs. According to Israeli officials, the extent of their involvement in the recent events remains unclear. Despite Israel's current inability to supply weaponry to other nations amidst a potential conflict with Hezbollah, who Erdogan claims possess a 150,000 rocket stockpile, this marks only the beginning of Israel's effort to support Ukraine. The politician believes Israel will adopt a more assertive stance against Russia going forward, potentially providing weapons to Ukraine if the conflict persists. An interview featuring Whiteman, who's the head of the Libertarian Caucus in Israel's parliament, on Russia's state-backed television network, Russia Today. In other words, he went on Russian state media and said this, gained significant attention as he declared that Russia would face consequences for supporting Israel's adversaries, and he affirmed Israel's determination to ensure Ukraine's victory in the conflict. So quite a tone shift from Israel this week. Next item. In February, the inflation rate of the European economy, caused in large part by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, showed signs of easing, dropping to 2.6%. This decline was attributed to several factors, including high interest rates, stabilizing energy prices, and sluggish economic growth, all of which has restrained price increases in stores. According to Eurostat, the statistical agency of the European Union, This figure in the 20 Eurozone countries marks a decrease from January's 2.8%. The current inflation rate is a far cry from its peak of 10.6% in October of 2022, which occurred when Russia disrupted natural gas supplies, causing energy prices to skyrocket. Food inflation has dropped from 5.6% to 4%, which is higher than the average, offering some relief, particularly to lower income individuals who allocate a larger portion of their earnings to these necessities. Energy prices also saw an overall decrease of 3.7%. Core inflation, which excludes the volatile food and fuel prices, is seen as a more reliable indicator of underlying inflationary pressure, and it declined to 3.1%, the lowest since March 2022, down from 3.3% in January. The surge in prices following the natural gas supply disruption and post-pandemic supply chain bottlenecks has subsided. However, the resulting loss of purchasing power has slowed down economic growth in Europe, and many workers are yet to recover through wage adjustments. The decrease in inflation rate brings the European Central Bank closer to its target of 2% inflation, which they deem optimal for the economy. To combat inflation, the ECB, or European Central Bank, raised interest rates to a record in September, making credit more expensive and dampening a demand for goods. However, higher credit rates can impede growth, with the Eurozone experiencing zero growth the last quarter and the previous year a slight contraction. Experiencing zero growth in the last quarter of the previous year and a slight contraction the quarter before that. Concerns about growth and moderate inflation have promoted discussions on when the European Central Bank might consider reducing rates. While the ECB's rate setting and governing council is meeting soon, rate changes are not expected at this time. The council and ECB president are likely to await further data on wages and prices before considering rate cuts, possibly in June, ensuring that inflation remains under control before they lower it. So that's it for that. Next item. On Thursday, Representative Pete Aguilar, leading the House Democratic Caucus, quickly dismissed a cross-party proposal that aimed to combine aid for Ukraine with border security measures. Aguilar recognized the good intentions behind the initiative, but expressed doubts about its effectiveness as a solution. The proposed legislation, introduced earlier in the month, sought to resolve the deadlock on military support for Ukraine, obstructed by conservative opposition in the House. Proponents of the bill include Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a key advocate who's rallying for a discharge petition to push the proposal to a vote. However, the bill faced criticism from many Democrats, particularly for its inclusion of policies like the Remain in Mexico mandate for immigrants and for omitting aid such as humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza. Aguilar emphasized the Democratic Party's leadership preference for a Senate-approved foreign aid bill that encompasses new funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza without the border security elements. He urged Speaker Mike Johnson to prioritize this bill, highlighting it as the clear bipartisan solution supported by a substantial Senate majority. Former President Trump's opposition to new Ukraine aid has had a noticeable impact, with many Senate Republicans and House conservatives resisting the foreign assistance bill. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has even threatened a no-confidence motion against Johnson, the current Speaker of the House, should he proceed with the aid bill. The deadlock has led Democratic leaders to explore alternative tactics to bring the Senate bill to a vote in the House, including potentially initiating their own discharge petition. While currently considering various strategies, Democratic leaders, according to Aguilar, are keeping all options open, but emphasize the urgency of having the current Senate bill debated on the House floor as the most straightforward course of action. Next item. So this is a sort of a general update on the Polish border grain protest crisis. On Monday, the 26th, Ukraine has urged Poland to take action against farmers who destroyed 160 tons of Ukrainian grain during a protest, so-called protest, at Polish train station. In response to this incident, Ukraine has formally requested that Polish officials identify and penalize those involved, according to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Kubrakov. Kubrakov condemned the destruction of the grain as a display of impunity and irresponsibility, emphasizing the need for the perpetrators to be apprehended, held accountable, and punished. He highlighted the mutual interest of both Ukraine and Poland as two allied European nations in resolving the issue. The incident, where grain intended for export via Gdansk port, was dumped at a station near Bydgoszcz. I'm going to go with that, in eastern Poland. Marks the fourth time Ukrainian grain has been targeted by Polish farmers in recent protests. Polish farmers, leading a broader European agricultural protest movement, have been vocal against what they perceive as unfair competition from Ukraine for more than a year. The European Union's suspension of import duties, quotas, and trade defense measures for Ukrainian imports in June 2022, following the outbreak of war with Russia, has led to a surge of Ukrainian grain entering neighboring countries, sparking protests from local farmers and truckers. The protests have seen border crossings and highways blocked, actions that were initially encouraged by Poland's previous nationalist government. The government had an election, and despite the change in government, Warsaw remains cautious in addressing former protests due to the potential political implications and the upcoming European Parliament elections. During a recent visit to the Poland-Ukraine border, a Ukrainian government delegation, led by Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, proposed a five-step plan aimed at reaching a compromise. Shmyhal pointed out the negative impact of the blockade on bilateral trade between the two economies, stressing losses not only for Ukraine but also for Polish exporters. I believe it's established that Ukraine imports more from Poland than exports to Poland. Anyway, the proposed plan includes aligning with a European Commission suggestion to limit imports of certain products and calls for an EU-wide ban on Russian agricultural imports. Ukraine is also prepared to implement a verification mechanism for its grain and other agricultural imports. In other words, Ukraine is offering concessions to the initial deal offered in early 2022 after the invasion to try to get these protests to come to an end. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized the importance of maintaining strong ties with Poland while defending Ukrainian businesses affected by the protests. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Border Service spokesperson Andriy Demchuk blockades, causing significant delays for trucks at the border. Additionally, on Wednesday, Turkish President Erdogan revealed plans for Turkey and the United Nations to establish a new safety mechanism for commercial ships navigating the Black Sea. This announcement was made in anticipation of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's impending visit to Turkey for discussions. Erdogan, addressing the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit declaration in Albania via a video message, emphasized the necessity of a regulatory framework to safeguard commercial navigation in the Black Sea. He mentioned ongoing efforts with the United Nations to develop a new system for ensuring safe passage. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced Lavrov is scheduled to arrive in Turkey on Friday for a meeting with his Turkish counterpart, Hakan Fidan, as part of an audience at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, a diplomatic gathering in Turkey's Mediterranean region. In addition to this dialogue with Fidan, Lavrov is expected to meet with Erdogan, continuing the tradition of their interactions during his visits to Turkey, the most recent of which occurred in April of 2023. While Erdogan did not delve into the specifics of the proposed safety mechanism, he referenced Turkey and the UN's prior success in mediating the Safe Grain Export Agreement. The agreement is critical for the safe export of Ukrainian grain, a crucial global agricultural supplier, was abandoned by Russia in 2023, a year after its initiation. Following the termination of the original agreement, commercial vessels from Ukrainian ports have relied on the territorial waters of Black Sea NATO members Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey for safety. I should mention, as well as the amazing work of the ZSU. The upcoming Antalya Diplomacy Forum, where Lavrov is expected to participate, has previously facilitated dialogue between Russian and Ukrainian officials. Erdogan, in his message, reiterated Turkey's willingness to host further The forum will feature Crimean Tatar leaders, highlighting ongoing discussions around Crimea and Russian treatment of the Crimean Tatar population, with Turkey continuing to reject Russia's annexation of the region. Additionally, and some good news, London-based brokers are encouraged by the withdrawal of Russian naval forces due to Ukrainian naval drone and missile activities, creating a favorable situation for commerce through this essential passageway. A previously established insurance program aimed at facilitating Ukrainian grain exports is now broadened to encompass all civilian goods, including steel and iron ore, as announced last Friday. Ukraine, which depends on Western financial support, views any increase in export income as crucial for sustaining its resistance during the ongoing invasion by Russia, according to the economic minister, Yulia Svirdenko. Following Ukraine's effective maritime operations against the Russian fleet, which led to Russian warships seeking refuge near Sevastopol, the Black Sea trade has revitalized, overcoming obstacles such as naval mines and Russian blockades. This resurgence in trade marked a significant uptick in grain shipments. It is critical globally, given that Ukraine has a role as a major agricultural exporter to countries in need, like Lebanon and Afghanistan. However, challenges remain, such as disruptions in the Red Sea affecting Ukraine's export recovery. The Unity Initiative, which allows London insurance markets to access $20 million US dollars in Ukrainian compensation, in a Ukrainian compensation fund, has played a role in reducing insurance premiums, thereby lowering costs for Ukrainian industry to export. This initiative now includes all non-military shipments, as I said. War risk insurance, which covers damages beyond standard shipping policy, no claims since its inception in November. Marsh McLennan's Marine and Cargo head, Marcus Baker, highlighted the transition from a humanitarian to a broader economic focus, aiming to decrease export costs in the Black Sea overall. This is to ensure exports continue, but at more affordable rates. In other words, the fund was put in place originally to make sure for humanitarian reasons, basically, and now it's looking like maybe a more viable financial mechanism in general. Ukraine aims to leverage this opportunity to boost its steel and iron ore exports, vital for its metallurgical industry, which saw a 70% decrease in production last year compared to pre-war levels. Increased revenue from these exports is essential for funding the war effort, especially as financial aid from the West is primarily allocated for domestic social needs. So that is my update for this week. I believe up next, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So at Tochnyi, we have an economics contributor, Ben. The thing about Ben is Ben has a baby, and that means two things. It means thing number one, Ben is sick a lot. He's just got baby illnesses and he's sick a lot. And number two, it means he doesn't have a lot of time or the ability in his small apartment in Paris to record things for us. But he made an effort this week. In spite of that, he's quite sick, and it's evident in the recording. So I think we need to laud Ben. Ben does amazing work. He made a really great graphic for us, or I should say for us, for everyone. He made a really great graphic that shows Russia's sovereign wealth fund, which, as I mentioned, has been about half depleted since the start of the full-scale invasion. And he did a great job, like showing by color, like what specifically is contained within the sovereign wealth fund. So we'll show that graph. Ben's got a lot of great information about it, and he's going to share that with us. So I will go ahead and turn it over to the recording of our great economics contributor, Ben. Over to you, Ben, I guess.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome on for this recorded econ segment for Tochnyi. Today we're going to speak about something which I'm sure you are all fascinated about, namely the Russian National Fund. Before starting, though, let me just cover a few topics. First of all, my voice, I'm terribly sorry. I'm pretty sick, doing my best. If you cannot bear it, call the manager. What can I tell you? The other thing is that the data I'm showing to you and on which I'm going to rely now is collected from the Russian Ministry of Finance. It seems reliable. Emphasis on seems. I think it's good. It does look good. I cannot guarantee that it's not they're not doing the usual shenanigan thing where They hide and they steal and they pretend that something is some level and they're not. That being said, I'm taking this at face value, and I hope I won't be put to shame very, very soon for this. One last thing, the data will be made available, as well as the code that is allowed to create this graph. So if anyone has any problem with it, you can always dig a little bit deeper in this, and you can either correct me or understand why I've taken some decisions. That being said, the Russian sovereign fund. So this may not seem like something we want to be speaking about. What we care about are, battles and even the sale of oil, or the price of oil and this sort of things. We don't really care about the national fund usually, and yet we do. But maybe most of all because the Russians care about it and they tell us that they care about it. It is key to their propaganda. It fits with the idea that Russia is immense, Russia is rich, and as such, Russia is unbeatable. Why would you try to attack someone that can outspend you every single day of the week? They can outproduce you, they can outspend you, they're unbeatable. Just give up. Proof that they're unbeatable, they've got this huge pile of money called the National Wealth Fund, which they can dig into whenever they need something. They can afford to make mistakes. Why? Because they have that fund that will pay them for everything. They will pay for everything, be it extra missiles, be it extra ammunition, be it even more people that they can import from Cuba, Nepal. That money is key to their propaganda and maybe even potentially how they see themselves. So taking it seriously is warranted. So what I'm going to try to do during the segment is two things. The first one is to try to define exactly what the National Wealth Fund is, what it is and what it is not. And in second case, I will be asking the all-important question, what National Fund doing? Namely, I will look at what happened to the National Fund over the past 3 years or so. So let's go back, if you will, down memory lane to 2008. 2008 is a very important date because it's the moment when Russia repaid the bulk of its government debt. The public debt of Russia was mostly repaid. 10 years earlier, it had been standing at 100% of GDP, and then the wave of oil money just landed in Russia. They could just buy, sell oil, take the money, and they didn't need debt anymore. And that's also, maybe not by chance, a big moment of change in the politics of Russia. That's the moment of the first war with Georgia. That's the moment of the second war with Georgia. That's the moment of the famous Munich conference. That's a key moment in the progression of Putinism. And at that point, from the point of view of the finance ministry, the question changed completely. Decision makers such as Alexei Kudrin, the then finance minister, could stop asking themselves, how are we going to forestall ignominious bankruptcy for another month? And instead start asking themselves a completely different set of questions, and starting with, what are we going to do with so much money? Well, the easy answer is to say, well, dude, you have money, spend it. And it's not as if Russia couldn't do with a little bit of, extra paint here and there. There's a lot of investment to be made and for the necessary and for the unnecessary, but there's a lot of things that could go into helping Russia. So spending, they were not short an idea, but no, they decided to save it. and they saved it. Sorry, they saved it using what was at the time state of the art, namely a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund is just a pile of money a state sets aside in case. They even went so far as to imitate the state of the art at the time and to implement a legally binding budget rule. Namely, if the oil and gas fiscal revenue for a given year was higher than X, then the money extra above X was automatically given to the National Wealth Fund. The government, the parliament, even the president, nothing to say about it. The law was there, and it would just happen. On the other hand, if the money that came from oil and gas fiscal revenue was lower than X, then the money could be taken away from the National Wealth Fund and given back to the budget so as to keep it balanced and also as to keep the currency stable. Very, solid system that was put in place. However, even at the time, if you read the papers that were published in academic journals, everyone agreed that the key to success for any sovereign wealth fund was independence. You had to be independent from political meddling, because if the politicians came into it, they would ask for help for their friends, and then they would ask for support, and etc., etc., etc. There would be a lot of problems, and you didn't want that. So, independence. And there you can guess where the problem is going to start, because of course, politically independent, powerful institutions have no place in Putin's Russia, and independence was taken out of the table. The National Wealth Fund was not going to be an economic beast at heart. It was going to be a political beast, motivated primarily by political ambitions. And there's a number of things that show that. The first one is that it's actually a fund without a fund manager. There's no director of the National Wealth Fund in Russia today, and there's never have been one. The director de facto is actually the finance minister, so an immediately political character. Then there's another very, very big difference, is that political factors objectively drive a large portion of the decisions on where to invest, and when to invest and when to disinvest. So, for instance, that's the most famous example. In 2013, the National Wealth Fund of Russia invested $15 billion in Ukrainian bonds. All this to help Lukashenko, which was being rocked by a lot of problems. And they invested that money clearly on the behest of the Kremlin. These are $15 billion that were as good as lost, because the value of the Ukraine bond at the time was very low and was bound to go even lower. Why? Because they were being rocked by the Maidan Revolution, or were about to be. Another example is 2014, when this budget rule that I just talked about, that was that, the alpha and omega and how the whole system was going to work. So in 2014, after the invasion of Crimea, the sanctions that came along, the economic crisis that came along, so the budget rule was suspended. Okay, now the budget rule works for when everything's fine, but when things are not fine, you suspend it and you give back the freedom to the political actors. What sort of rule is this, that whenever it's needed, it's suspended? It doesn't make much sense. And the third example, which is much more recent. It's that in 2021, from the basket of currencies, we'll come back to that question of basket of currencies, to a basket of currencies that was held by the National Wealth Fund, they dropped the dollar. The American dollar, right? Not the Australian or some other weird dollars. No, 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 no. The American dollars was dropped from the National Wealth Fund, and it did not have a small portion beforehand. It was 50% of the liquidity of the fund was held in American dollars. And suddenly, this position was liquidated, and it was replaced by a mix of euros and yuan and gold, British pounds, Japanese yen. This is not something you do when you are a sound money manager. When you're a sound money manager, of course you diversify, makes sense, but you don't do it from one moment to the next. And above all, you don't drop the dollar completely. Maybe you want to limit your exposure, but you don't drop it completely. And that was another example of why the Russian National Fund was actually a political animal. But all right, so I said that the academic literature considers that when a fund is not independent, its results tend to be quite poor. That's true in general, but is it true in Russia? Well, yes, of course it's true. The performance of the fund are, well, let's put it this way, pathetic. Remember, for context, that Russia is the number one oil exporter in the world. Number one. Number two some years. Sometimes maybe even number three, but it's a massive player. It should have at least the third largest national wealth fund in the world. Does it? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't even rank among the 10 largest. Australia has a bigger one. Singapore, Brunei, Qatar, they all have bigger funds. And if you make it as a ratio of GDP, it's even more ridiculous. The largest sovereign wealth fund, which is the one of Norway, which is considered as the gold standard in the industry, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund represents 300% of the Norwegian GDP. The Russian sovereign wealth fund represents 12%. That's nearly 30 times less. So when I'm saying that it is very small, it is very small. I'm not even joking. I'm not even like being sassy or being anti-Russian on purpose to try to make you feel better. It is very, very small. And finally, you could say, well, it is small, but it's growing fast. I mean, it's a grower, not a shower. And no. Before the war, well, before the full-fledged invasion, there was a small debate within the less sexy parts of the Russian financial press over whether the fund was actually really underperforming. To give you an idea, in 2021, the fund lost at a return on investment of minus 6.3%. Minus 6%. I'm sorry, guys. 2021 is meant to be a recovery year. You're meant to grow very fast, not to lose money. So the fund is a bit of a catastrophe. It is far from being the mammoth, the unstoppable behemoth, the big stuff that the Russian propaganda calls it. So the result has been so poor that actually initially there wasn't one fund, there were two funds. One of them was a reserve fund, the other one was a stabilization fund. Doesn't matter. There were two funds. Well, now there's only one, because one of the two, the reserve fund, had been so thoroughly plundered by the government, which was desperately trying to stave off bankruptcy, that it was so small they decided just to fold it into the other half. There was no point keeping another fund open. So yeah, the results are pathetic, really. Okay, so now we see what it is, what it's not. We can move on to the second part, which is what the fund, how the fund have been performing and behaving. Because at this point, the notion of performance doesn't make much sense anymore. So how the fund has been behaving over the past 3 years. For this, I need to be a little bit technical for a second. The fund is actually divided in two. One of them is invested in domestic private assets. So it's worth about $100 billion that are either in corporate bonds or in shares. And it's, in a sense, it's like a development bank. It is designed to support strategic sectors within the Russian economy, such as banking, energy, and above all, transportation. What you read in the papers here and there, maybe if you follow this once in a while in a number of Ukrainian and Russian papers, you will read about it. They say that the fund is investing X billions in this project or that project. This money tends to come from that pile, and that pile is a bit autarkic. It's a closed circuit. They invest in bonds, and when the bonds are repaid, they reinvest that money somewhere else. As far as I've seen over the past 3 years, no money has either entered or left that pile for anything else than an investment. So it hasn't been touched, but it has not been replenished either. So that's the first part, is this sort of development bank. The other half is the one we're going to be looking at. It's usually called the liquid part of the bank. And if you look at the graph, that's what you see. That's the evolution of that bet. So it was, on average, around $100 billion worth. And it's invested solely in highly liquid assets, namely foreign currencies or gold. It is meant to be easy to invest, fast to invest. Easy to liquidate and fast to liquidate. All right, so let's have a look at the graph and let's try to understand what happened and why. So at first you see that of the year 2021, the level of the fund is pretty stable at $150 billion. It stays like that. The only important thing is that thing I mentioned earlier is the abandonment of the green bit, the dollar, for all the other bits. And when you look at it, the crisis that brewed from November, December, January happens. It's stable. The war is unleashed. February, March, and May. It's stable. So you would think that the fund sort of behaved itself relatively well. And indeed, that's what the image seems to indicate them. But there's a couple of issues there. The first one is that it's very unclear what part of the blue bit, the euros and pounds, were held in Russia itself. It's actually quite likely that a sizable portion of this money was actually held in Europe itself, probably in Belgium. And as such, it must have been frozen. And that's a massive oversight of the managers, well, since there's no manager of the ministry, is to have thought that the Europeans would not freeze Russian assets. And since the Europeans did freeze the Russian assets, the fund sort of lost part of its liquidity at that moment. It's very unclear how much. It's very clear if any, but something is likely to have happened. The second thing is that what we don't see there, but the one of the first things that happened in March was the suspension again of the budget rule. The government was free, if it wanted to start digging into the assets of the company, of the fund. This is an important part. When you look at other sovereign wealth funds, governments tend to dig into the revenue, so the dividends and the interest that have been paid by the invested assets. In this case, that's not how it works. It's really like a piggy bank. You just put the money in and you take the money out. You don't make a difference between the capital and the revenue. So the budget rule was suspended. The government is free to start withdrawing again, and they start doing this from June 2022, when they start withdrawing about $5 billion every month, more or less, on average. If you look at precisely June 22, what you see is a massive jump, and that's precisely the last moment when the budget rule is in action. The government has received a lot of cash from higher prices paid for oil and gas, and they're dutifully putting it back into the sovereign wealth fund almost as a show of force. Like, we don't need this money, we can save it, we're that rich. But of course, things are going to go downhill pretty fast, pretty hard from that moment on, especially from December 22. There, it's a massive $30 billion that is withdrawn from the government, from the fund's accounts, and placed into the government's account to cover for the spending. $30 billion, that's really, really significant. This is a sizable portion of the country's revenue. This is really not something to be stared at. And so that's what happened in December. So at that point, but the government is still trying to maintain a certain level of trust in the fund. And this is what you see in the little comment I put around January 23. They say that, oh yeah, things are going to come back to normal anytime now. By January, we're going to start pushing back money into the fund. But of course, at that moment, the price cap comes into play, and this is really a big problem for the Russians, and the money's not there anymore, and so they need to stop collecting. They need to stop putting in money. They need to stop pretending to do anything else than withdrawing. And that's exactly what you see. Every month they withdraw a little during the whole year 2023, and comes December, once again, to plug the gap, they pull out $30 billion in a move that I don't really understand. That might make sense from the point of view of an accountant, but for me, it makes no sense. So they pull out $30 billion, but they pull back $10 billion following the budget rule. Why? I don't know. But okay, anyway, the balance is $20 billion is withdrawn from the fund. By now, the fund is, so we're today, the fund is truly depleted, right? It stands at $60 billion, thereabout. There's a small problem with my graph. Okay, I will change that. I'm sorry, guys. It stands at $50 billion, thereabout. And that's about half the size that it was before the invasion, a third of the size that it was at its peak in June 22. So what we see from that is that the presumption that the fund is inexhaustible is completely false. Mind you, This is something that has served the Russians well. They've withdrawn from it when they needed it the most, the equivalent of $100 billion. Without those $100 billion, where would the Russian war effort be? It's not very clear, but certainly not at the point where it is. This was a true lifeline, and to the extent that we have to be honest in our assessment, it has served them well. But that moment is soon coming to an end. They can maybe withdraw another $30 billion, and maybe another one after this, but then it's over. And when it's over, yes, they can replace it. Of course, they can always find money somewhere else. They can either increase the taxes, decrease the taxes, and we've seen this happening already. They can liquidate part of the rest of the national wealth funds, the part that is illiquid, sell it regardless of the price. There's another $50 billion there, and they can fight for a whole year just on this. But this forces them to take political decision, and it's going to make them look very, very poorly, because they've been telling us for decades, well, not for decades, but for years, that they were untouchable because of that money. But now that money is gone, what should we consider from that? Yes, they can bleed, basically. And bleeding they're bleeding money, and that's an amazing achievement. Hopefully they will bleed even more. There are some indications that they're not in a happy place at the moment from a budgetary point of view. So there's still a lot of efforts to be made. If there's phone calls that you can pass to your make to your elected representatives, do them. But for now, the conclusion is that Putin had a piggy bank, and by now it has really and truly been butchered. On this, again, I wish you a very happy Sunday. I'm available if there's any questions. The data and the code will be available soon, and I will correct the little mistake that I've just spotted. Thank you.
Thanks, recorded, Ben. We'll try to get the graph up on Tochnyi, and I assume the code and stuff like Ben was saying. We'll get that up on the Tochnyi website. There is a Twitter link. We'll try to throw that up at some point for people to check it out. But I know not everyone has Twitter, so basically we'll get that up on the website as soon as possible. Ben worked real hard on it. We're very proud, and we're very happy that he did the work on that. I think it looks great. It's a really illustrative example of what's going on. So thanks to Ben again. So up next, we're going to have our report from German aid to Ukraine, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. So if anyone in the chat has any questions, you're welcome to mention in chat. So over to you, German aid.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I really liked that you said, thank you, recorded Ben. That was really, really funny. We will have I will have a very short segment on the news this week, very, very short. And at the end, I will talk about the Scholz decision on the Taurus topic, and also the leaked Bundeswehr discussion, just for you to know. Starting with Monday, we look directly at the deliveries of military aid to Ukraine. In the past 2 weeks, Germany has delivered the following to Ukraine: 10 Vector UAVs, 22 anti-drone sensors and jammers, 4 V-1 MC mine-clearing tanks, 4 border protection vehicles, 3 mobile remote-controlled and protected demining equipment, 250 toolkits with blasting material, around 14,000 shells of 155mm artillery ammunition, 147 night vision goggles, and 12 satellite communication terminals, which are most likely SatCube. We also pledged 10 new Bergepanzer II RAVs, which will be delivered in the future. On Tuesday, the German THW has sent further humanitarian aid worth more than 1.7 million euros to Ukraine, which is meant for the Kharkiv Oblast. They donated 5 dump trucks, a semi-trailer truck, 2 water tankers, and other humanitarian supplies. I reported on Wednesday that Germany is financing another 20 Caracals air mobile platforms for Ukraine. The delivery will take place over the following months. The vehicles will most likely be used by the Ukrainian special forces. Prior to the now 20 financed vehicles, Germany already financed 5 of them in November 2023, and all of them are most likely already delivered. Yesterday, I reported that the German government has very likely signed a new contract for the delivery of 500,000 first aid kits to Ukraine, of which 50,000 first aid kits have already been delivered. This is reported by the Ukrainian MOD on their website, by the way. Umarov's deputy for social issues, Natalia Kalmykova, I'm very sorry, inspected the first aid kits, the delivered first aid kits, and said that she was satisfied with the quality and the content. Germany already completed a previously announced delivery of 500,000 first aid kits in December 2023. Therefore, this must be a new contract. However, the confirmation from the German side is still pending. Today, it became known that Germany will participate in the procurement of SEC-located artillery ammunition. The German MOD told ARD that they want to participate in the financing and cover a significant part of the total costs. Talks are at a very advanced stage. It is not yet known how much money will Germany provide and what type of ammunition. So if we're talking about 1 to 2 millimeter ammunition or 155 millimeter, it's not yet known. But of course, I will report on it as soon as we know it. Yeah, that's for this week's news. Now to the Taurus topic. I just want to really talk briefly about it. First, Taurus. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced that Taurus delivery to Ukraine is ruled out for the time being. According to him, German soldiers would have to be deployed in Ukraine, which would rule out a delivery. As Scholz later indirectly stated, this has nothing to do with the technical requirements, but with the fact that he has no trust in Ukraine after all. He spoke in front of an audience about the possibility of hitting targets in Moscow with Taurus if the weapon is mishandled. Then coming to the leaked conversation, like everyone is welcome to join, ask questions, whatever you want. I try to summarize it as much as I can. Then there was, of course, the leak with the conversation between members of the Bundeswehr, in which the options of the deployment and the delivery of Taurus to Ukraine were discussed. First of all, I don't think that the leaks will change Scholz's opinion of the delivery of these cruise missiles. So I don't think that it will have any impact on that. But coming to the content of the leak, I really don't want to go into in too much detail, but I talk a bit about it to give you a basic understanding of the situation. The conversation between multiple very high-ranking Bundeswehr soldiers was intercepted by the Russians on the 19th of February, so before Scholz announced that the delivery of Taurus won't take place. So that's also why I think that it won't have an impact on that one. They basically, if I recall that correctly, prepared for a meeting a day or a couple of days later in the Ministry of Defense, where they want to brief Pistorius, our Minister of Defense. So I think that nothing of this which got leaked will change anything. In the leaked recording, it is discussed in more or less detail when and how Ukraine could deploy the Taurus in case of a delivery from Germany. It was about specific targets such as weapon depots and the destruction of the Kerch Bridge. If I recall correctly, they, for example, said that Ukraine might need more than 10 or 20 Taurus cruise missiles to really destroy the bridge and not just damage it. They also talked, for example, about the involvement of US and British troops on ground in Ukraine, which actually confirms Scholz's public statements that, for example, Great Britain is doing something which Germany can't, namely deploying troops on ground in Ukraine. Apart from that, there were actually some very good statements leaked in the conversation I want to highlight. The German soldiers, for example, showed full confidence in the capabilities of the Ukrainian army. The German Luftwaffe is said to have enormous respect for the performance of the Ukrainian Air Force, especially named was the performance of the Patriot air defense systems in Ukraine. So they're very impressed of what Ukraine can do with these systems in such a modern war with the time they had to prepare themselves, right, to get trained. And I think that's one thing to publicly state that in front of the press, right? That you have respect for them or that you have confidence in them, in the Ukrainians. But for me, it's something completely different when you think about the fact that they didn't think that nobody watching them, right? I mean, they said this knowing that it's not going to be public, so they actually feel and think that way. And I think that really means a lot. And that's something I hoped would get more publicly acknowledged or shared publicly because it's a very, very rare insight. It feels like most of the stuff you really hear that just off the news or in front of the press, but it could be all just fake or staged, right? But to actually hear this from the very high-ranking persons themselves without a middleman, I think that really means something. Yeah. So that's my my summary of the situation. If anyone has questions or from the guys here wants to talk about it, please go ahead.
I just thought I'd, demonstrate what the Taurus missile with the video is while we start the discussion. So, what actually happened before this whole leak germinated? Like,
You mean how this involved, or
yeah, how so we had this kind of a crazy escalation on different events during the week. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there were first reports that Scholz would say that he doesn't want to have Ukraine or doesn't want to deliver Taurus to Ukraine. Then a day later, it got confirmed, right?
Those were in tweets, right?
Yeah, this were in tweets. A day later, he went and met with a couple of very high-ranking people of some important news medias in Germany, and there he confirmed basically what was already known. There he said that they basically would need troops on the ground, just as a summary, right? And so everyone was already like gathering on that, trying to get the most news and headlines and everything. And Scholz actually reacted a couple of times to that. This was a discussion round. He does it, so Scholz does it with all the federal states in Germany. He goes to every single federal state, to some big city, and actually discuss it, has a discussion with several citizens. And there he clarified his statement and said that it's not technically necessary, what we already know or knew. But he, like I said before, he was talking about like when the weapon gets mishandled, you could strike on Moscow, on targets in Moscow, right? And he again said that other nations, like he didn't name Great Britain or France but he did before. He said that other nations had made sure that their weapons basically doesn't get mishandled. Together with all the other reports and all the other statements of him, he basically again said that France and Great Britain have also troops on ground, and they are watching the Ukrainians how to use Storm Shadow and Skull BG. So basically, for me, in my understanding, he's like saying they also don't trust the Ukrainians, but we are the only ones who get blamed for. I think the big difference is that the British and the French have at least the balls to still deliver the cruise missiles. Yeah, for me personally, I really don't see a big difference if we could arrange, for example, when he really has trust issues, to give them Taurus, right? And in the meantime, to for example, talk with the British or the French that they also watch over the launches of our systems. I mean, it's I don't think. Please correct me, someone, if I'm wrong, but I don't think that technical people who are involved in cruise missiles with Storm Shadow and Skull BG couldn't tell the difference if the Ukrainians are actually programming the missiles towards targets in Moscow, right? So they should be able to do that. So it's, for me, it's just an excuse to not deliver Taurus because of trust. This basically, and then there was like 1 or 2 days left or pause. And then the Russians said, hey, we have a conversation, Bundeswehr soldiers talking about attacking Russian targets, Russian soil. Of course, everyone was like, what the fuck are they talking about? Like, yeah, there were, for example, media reports that that these could be just something which had happened in 2000, I believe it was 2022. There were several Bundeswehr soldiers, and this actually happened. I just don't know if it was in 2022 or 2023. There were multiple Bundeswehr soldiers which actually tried to steal weapons and explosives from the Bundeswehr stocks. And actually, they wanted to travel to Ukraine and blow up the Kerch Bridge by themselves. That actually happens. So everyone was like, do they mean this? And they just tried to get PR out of it, like 1 or 2 years after that. But then at the same day or a day later, they leaked this this conversation. And for me as a German, when we didn't had all the information back then, right, the confirmation which we now have, it sounds 100% authentic. I mean, it's one thing to generate AI voices and stuff like this, but to have a perfect conversation, like with all the, I think everyone knows it, right? When you're talking in your language, like how you say specific words, how you make pause, like specific phrases, like everything was perfect. And like doing this over nearly 40 minutes with AI, I don't think that's possible into that extent.
But they
And
confirmed it, right?
yeah, they did.
Yeah.
I just mean that back then they didn't. Like they took 1 day to actually say, okay, that's an authentic conversation. But already back then I could tell like it's 100% a real conversation. And one thing which they also said, they still confirmed that it's an authentic conversation, but they said that they don't know yet if specific parts of the conversation are altered or made up, right? But I really don't think, like, there was not a single second in the conversation where I thought that's fake or that's AI or that's altered or edited or whatever. It's like every single second of it is, for me, authentic.
I think that's reasonable. Like the Russian hackers saw an opportunity to have German soldiers talking about striking Russian territory, and they saw a win and they leaked it, and that's good enough. I wouldn't see a good reason to alter it, but like you said, it's something we need to be wary of. I mean, we're probably going to witness, I would say before long, like the first international incident in history started by some kind of a deep fake or semi-deep faked, recording or video or something. So it's always something to keep an eye out for. Do we have anything else we want to talk about with the Taurus or the other leaks and stuff?
Well,
Yep. So go ahead.
no, First you.
Okay. I just want to say that I want to highlight again that the Russians announced this leak or announced this conversation with German soldiers trying to or discussing strikes on Russia, right? And the only thing which got mentioned in the conversation was like how Ukraine could use to strike the Kerch Bridge, for example. I know that Russia thinks that Crimea and everything else is in Ukraine is theirs, but even if they don't think that, like, nobody talked about striking Russia, not a single second. Just want to highlight that. And then yeah, that's my basic yeah. Erlend, please go.
So what I think is interesting with all this, and it's also that, you know, you get this guy mixing up completely different topics on Monday, because he Monday last week he had convened this meeting for European leaders to coordinate and better the aid to Ukraine. And one of the things he brought up was well, he said, I think he said European, NATO. He kind of mixed up a little bit the terms. That he wouldn't exclude the possibility of European or French soldiers deployed on Ukrainian soil. And then there's been a lot of debate about this, and I think the first thing Scholz said last week or this week was basically that there will be no NATO troops in Ukraine. And like, so he kind of managed to, in 1 week, first put his hands into all the other allies' sovereign politics, which is like one diplomatic scandal on itself, because he has no authority about you know, what France want to do with their soldiers unless it's in Germany. And then he started basically spreading intelligence about, or he confirmed the presence of British and maybe French soldiers in Ukraine. And then this whole intel, like Russian phone tapping leak happened, right? So it's been a quite a wild week in the European political scene, I would say.
That's a good description. Hawaiian week.
Yeah.
Probably said that I want to kill myself, but yeah.
And it's like, it's a whole big mess, and you know, I'm not sure exactly what Macron wanted, because, you know, this is kind of what we were thinking about Macron and this war, right? That's been like what I've been imagining in my head when I heard Macron for the last 2 years. And I think you said something very good about this before our stream, before I started the stream, Joseph. So if you might.
Oh yeah, I don't know. There's just like a circuitous line drawn between what, you know, this Macron we have, where he's like, I'm waiting for Putin to call me back, you know, so we can have peace, right? And then an inexplicable series of events have happened where now Macron is saying we should send troops to Ukraine, and not really explaining himself very thoroughly. So I don't know, just a fun. We're not sure what happened in between, and hopefully we'll get more francophone contributors like our good friend Ben, who can maybe help explain this transition to us. But I think overall, it's still like a characteristic of like Macron or French politics, in the sense that, like, it's always about autonomy, right? It's about this idea that, like, France or Europe at large is sort of independent and autonomous from especially the United States, but, you know, France is like autonomous in the world. And so I think a lot of these statements can be read as, like, initially when he wanted to make peace with Putin, it was this idea that, like, France will do it unilaterally, sort of, and like act on its own will. And I think that this is like the same tune, but like a different, you know, key or something. Like, he's now decided we are going to still act on our own will and assert, like, France as a country, or Europe as an identity, but, you know, out of the US's shadow, but we're going to do it in a more assertive way rather than a less, or a diplomatic way, right? I think that's kind of my read on it. But take it or leave it. I certainly don't pretend to have expertise on French politics or Macron himself.
Yeah, I just want
But a lot of that early stuff with Macron, I mean, it all came out that he was doing that at the behest of Zelensky, right? So, like, Zelensky asked him to call Putin. He asked him to negotiate with Putin. It wasn't Macron thinking that he could fix everything himself. He was doing it as a favor, and then it all blew up in his face.
Yeah, I just want to say that, our interpretation about like what his intentions are of these different events is probably not worth a lot. But however, what this has caused is that, he basically broke the ice on something that apparently has been like a no-no for NATO allies to talk about sending troops to Ukraine, because the first thing that happened after he talked about that is that some Baltic countries started talking about, we want to support that. We are all in on deploying troops in western parts of Ukraine. And then suddenly we hear news that Canada is willing to train Ukrainians on ground in Ukraine, which is like, basically taking up the track from before the full-scale invasion, because Canada was very deeply involved in training Ukrainians in Ukraine, actually. So yeah, I mean, Colby, what's been on the news in Canada about this thing? I think that's also interesting.
Well, I will say that I think the probability of Canada resuming such a training mission unilaterally is extremely, extremely low. To be clear, like what the minister said is that they'd be open to considering that, not that, oh yeah, we're definitely going to do this. So very important to actually understand what he said, because I'm sure there's lots of people, whenever news like this breaks, people don't actually like read what the actual story is. They don't actually read what was actually said. People just start jumping to their own conclusions and wish casting, as we all know. And so do not hold your breath on Canadian forces going back to Ukraine to start training Ukrainian troops. It could happen, but I don't believe it will happen unless there is some sort of agreement among some other countries that a multinational effort would be set up. It's not something that's going to require unanimity in the alliance, because we're just not going to get that. There's members of the NATO alliance that are not going to support that. But really, it's going to take the United States, most likely, maybe some other of the big European players, if they went for it, even if President Biden is not willing to take that step, which I suspect he is not. But if the United Kingdom and France, for example, were willing to commit that they would start training Ukrainian forces in Western Ukraine, then I could see Canada going along with them. But our government is absolutely not going to be the first country to make a firm commitment to do that without any other allies willing to go first, really, or at least several countries to make a joint announcement together that they're all going to take that step. We will not lead on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're gonna see like Lithuania suddenly sending a battalion of troops to Western Ukraine on their own. But if France and the UK are willing to lead something like this, I expect there will be many nations that would tag along in a way, maybe not with major contributions, but even a small contribution would actually make a big difference if it's many, because as the more countries that decide that this is the next step they want to take, the more permanent that would get, and that's in my opinion the most important thing of a sort of a mission like this. I'm not necessarily hoping for this huge Western alliance that's going to relieve the whole western border towards Transnistria or the northern border with Belarus. Although that would have been very, very good for Ukraine, that's not what I think is going to happen, if something will happen. At least not the first thing we will see, but a Western presence in Western Ukraine would also solidify the rest of the aid that we're giving to Ukraine, because we would have a lot bigger risk, if Ukraine were to fail. So
yeah, I will add as well that if Ukraine finally gets around to sorting out this matter of conscription, which is something that is very much needed, I think, such a training mission, I think, is really going to be required if Ukraine's going to have any hope of trying to induct large numbers of new recruits into its military. That's a very challenging endeavor. A lot of the troops, the new inductees over the past 2 years of war, have not received quite as much training as they probably should. They've, had to really compress that out of necessity. Obviously, they haven't had as much time to train because they needed those bodies on the front line. So if they're going to start mobilizing a lot of additional personnel, they're all going to need training. And it's going to be very challenging to get good training done on, again, probably a compressed timeline, because there's just very significant need for more personnel at the front. And they're going to need a lot of help in doing that training. And if that training has to be conducted outside of Ukraine, which it has been so far for a lot of the troops that NATO countries are obviously training, it's not happening in Ukraine right now. So it makes it a lot more complicated and expensive to do that training if it has to happen outside of Ukraine. So I think there's very significant benefits potentially to be accrued here by having a multinational training force set back up, reestablished in Western Ukraine. And it'll be even more important if they do go through with conscription, because there's just going to be so many new troops that need to get trained in a short period of time. They're not going to be able to waste time getting all those people moved to locations elsewhere in Europe. It adds so much more cost and delay to the whole process.
Yeah, I wish Vasil was here with us right now, because I think he knows a lot more about that process to get the mobilization law approved in the Rada. But apparently it's not so easy to get things through that parliament, even now in wartime. It seems like they've been, they've gone back a little bit to where they were before the full-scale invasion. I think he said to me that there were 3,400 amendments from the opposition to the proposed law. So that's interesting. But hopefully they will get it done in a compromise or something soon. But yeah, I'm sure Andrew has something he wants to say about the mobilization, conscription.
Well, I mean, I don't have much to say about it in specifics, but generally speaking, it has to happen immediately. Like, the brigades don't have enough infantry to fight with right now. They have enough like in the back, like logistics people. It's like, okay, it's not perfect. It'll probably never be good, but their frontline infantry are just nowhere near enough men. And even more important than that is that the men they do have are so exhausted that they can't fight effectively most of the time. So a lot of these guys are being rotated out of combat way more frequently than they're supposed to be, because of exhaustion, which means that the front has way fewer men than they even have. So first, they don't have enough men to start with, and the men that they do have, a lot of them can't fight. So it's just a huge problem. They need a massive influx of infantry, like tens of thousands. And then in addition to that, they also need the engineers to dig the trenches, etc. So they're probably going to need tens of thousands of those too. And we're talking about, they need them right now. And every day that passes, the situation gets worse, because you're losing men to casualties, and you're just continually losing guys to just exhaustion. Because a lot of these guys have been fighting pretty consistently for 2 years straight with very few breaks, and they they just can't handle it anymore. I mean, it's just too much.
Yeah, I mean there are substantial training programs still going on in the West, both here in Norway, the UK, I think France. Not sure about Poland right now, but there should be one, and in Germany. So there is substantial effort being made, but I think training Ukrainians in Ukraine with Western instructors would be a lot more effective, especially logistically for the Ukrainian military. It would be easier. It does cost them a lot of resources and money just to organize sending the soldiers abroad, and that could be avoided. So I welcome this very, very much. If it's going to happen soon or not, I'm not sure. Hopefully, but I'm happy that Macron did this. I don't know if it was a political accident or if it was intentionally. It's not something I want to, start conspiring about. But I'm just happy it happened, because breaking that ice, I think that's good for Ukraine. And if that happened because of the disagreements between the European leaders about sending Taurus or other long range strike capabilities, if that's why it happened, then so be it. But I hope the whole drama that happened this week doesn't have any large negative consequences for Ukraine, because there are possible issues that could occur, especially when it comes to the trust between the political leaders and the different military leaders in Europe. This could have been avoided. Of course, it's not good, especially when there is such a large coordination effort to get aid into Ukraine, and I really hope that is not going to be affected by the leaks, the leaks made by Scholz intentionally, and also the unintentional leaks that the Russians published.
Well, the training soldiers is obviously very needed, but the Russians target training, especially training done by Westerners, and having even more Westerners, or even more official Westerners, because like a lot of the Westerners I'm talking about are volunteers who go just to help. But if you start having militaries doing it, they're going to be huge targets.
Well,
Russia
I would
has
just say
already.
if U.S. or European troops are on the ground in Ukraine, you would have some kind of air shield over Western Ukraine. I don't, Erlend, would you agree or disagree? You'd have to, right?
I think it would be 100% based on ground-based air defenses, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But like they would have to have some kind of zone in however small in Western Ukraine where they just say, this is our logistics spot. No, we're covering it from air we're protecting the air, right? I mean, or no?
Oh yeah, they have to. There's no other option. You can't. Not that they don't want to trust Ukraine in air defenses, but they cannot operate in a conflict zone without establishing their own air defense system. And when you cannot have your own jets fly there, because that's something I absolutely don't think is going to happen anytime soon, then you would have to bolster the ground-based air defenses pretty heavily, which means
it would mean a lot of Patriot missiles, because they're not going to be shooting cruise missiles. They're not going to be shooting bombs. They're going to be shooting ballistic missiles. And they've done it before. They've done very large ballistic missile strikes on training centers. I mean, hitting 10 to 20 centers simultaneously across Ukraine. They've done it before. I have records of it. I know I have friends who were there when it happened. So they do continuously do this with large ballistic missile strikes. And if this were to happen, basically the only way to make it safe would be to just have like a ton of Patriot batteries, or something similar. And you'd need a lot of them, because you're going to be getting hit all over the country simultaneously with ballistic missiles. Because that's Russia's MO.
Yeah, and I think the French has, of course, SAMP-T. Not sure about the track record of that with anti-ballistic capabilities, but it certainly is supposed to be working against ballistic missiles. Maybe Colby can add something more to that.
I've not really seen any public commentary on how effective SAMP-T has been against Russian ballistic missiles. So I can just say that it does have a limited ABM capability, and any additional air defenses, whether it's ABM capable or not, is obviously a very good thing for Ukraine, because they face threat from a wide spectrum of Russian PGM threats, not just ballistic missiles. I'd say that, you can look at John's raid tracking. I think cruise missiles are at least the plurality of the incoming, and then there's the Shaheds as well. So the ballistic threat is just a subset, although a very dangerous and challenging to intercept subset of the overall spectrum of threats that Ukraine is facing from the Russians.
Yeah, and I mean, you probably would have seen layering of air defense as well. So I don't think you would only see, some SAMP-Ts and Patriots deployed. Probably NASAMs from countries that are operating them, maybe some IRIS-Ts, etc. But yeah, this is all fictional until there's actually something that is going to happen. So I think we can probably go further along in the conversation about something else.
Well, the training centers need to be guarded regardless of who's there training them. So it is a real problem, no matter whether the European countries are sending troops or not.
Yeah, of course. And you're not going to just have air defenses. You're also going to have force protection, because you don't want, any unwanted attention, not just from, Russians, but anyone near your military installations. And yeah, it would probably be a very, very large operation just to secure an area where you can do training. Does any of the Germans have anything that you want to say to regards of the diplomatics that happened this week?
Not really. To be honest, like I know how I am, right? I just try to take a look at on the complete situation and wait until further statements have been made. Right now, it's a lot of guesswork, and what Scholz confirmation claims, whatever, actually mean. So I would wait until we get further information on that one regarding training on Ukrainian soil. I can guarantee you for 110% that Scholz doesn't send troops to Ukraine, no matter if it's observing missile strikes or training on ground. That's not going to happen. They still will be training Ukrainian troops in Germany. They actually said like 1 week ago or something that if the EU doesn't I'm lost for English words. Bionade verlängern. Bionade's not here, unlucky. If the EU mission Eumamua doesn't get renewed again, then Germany would prolong. Then Germany would finance the training completely by themselves, or doing the training completely by themselves. That was actually announced last week. But I don't think that the EU will say, yeah, we don't train Ukrainian soldiers anymore in Germany, right? So I don't think it's necessary, and that's why I don't mention it before. And just to give you a couple of numbers, since we were talking about it, like since the start of the new year, there were over 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers already trained in Germany. And they actually put out a number of the costs of the training since the training started in Erlend. Do you know when the training started? In 2023, right? Early 2023?
Yeah.
Yeah, so since then, the training in Germany costs 282 million euros. Just to give you a couple of numbers. And since the start of the new year, we have already trained over 2,000 troops here.
And that's 2,000 troops totally, or at the time?
No, since January 2024, we have trained over 2,000 troops in Ukrainian troops in Germany.
Okay. that sounds very low. But because
Last year it was 10,000. This year the goal is also 10,000. So having 2,000 already trained in mid-February, I think that's
okay, now I understood. Sorry, yeah, I thought last February. Sorry, but yeah,
no. It was announced like mid-February that we have trained over 12,000 troops in Germany, and we had 10,000 at the end of the year. So since January, over 2,000.
understood. And on top of that, you have tens of thousands recruits trained in the UK. That's what we see the pictures of here. And then you also had brigades trained by US instructors in Germany and in Poland, etc. So there are lots of different things happening in several countries, and the numbers are totally very, very high, actually.
Yeah.
But it's very expensive. And yeah, I hope something will happen about in Ukraine. I think it would bolster the whole commitment to Ukraine as a whole. But yeah, optimistic but doubtful is my assessment.
Okay, we got quite a few questions in chat. So is there anything else we want to cover before we get to like direct questions?
I think Colby had something he wanted to
Yes.
to cover as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I think Germany to Ukraine mentioned this when he was going over the German news, just about the Czech shell procurement, because there was a interesting development today with German media reporting that Germany is now interested in joining that procurement program to buy these 800,000 shells that exist outside of the EU.
Also the Dutch.
Sorry, yeah, the Dutch as well. The Dutch,
Also
they said initially 100 million euros, and then the other day that was up to 250 million euros, which is good. So it's getting up there. So the other day, the Czech Ministry of Defense told Politico that they were well above 50%, and actually, I think almost close to 2/3 is actually what they said of the total financing required to buy all of that ammunition being sourced. So we can say maybe it's around actually 60% of the total required funds have been sourced. And they noted some of the countries that, we know some countries have been public about their willingness to participate in that. The Dutch, the Belgians, Canadian government said that they were potentially willing to participate in that. But there's also, as I said, a large number of other countries that have not disclosed that they are willing to contribute money to this. So the main open question for me is, when the Czech Ministry of Defense made this statement, was that 60% figure, did that include the German government's commitment that we're now learning about now, or is that something that's new and in addition to them reaching 60% of the total financing? Because if they got to 60% of the total financing without a commitment from Germany, and now the German government's saying that they want to make, what was it, a significant contribution or something along those lines to that fund, then you could imagine them getting a lot closer to 100% if Germany is willing to kick in a significant amount. And that's, great from Germany, because they had already made a large contribution of 122 ammunition separate from this, because that was sourced from Bulgaria. I think, how many shells was that? 120,000 shells, was it? Yeah. So 120,000 shells from Bulgaria. And then now there's this 500,000 155 and 300,000 122 from outside the EU, which, is I think we know that India is one of the sources. South Africa very well maybe one of the other sources. Don't know where else the ammunition may be coming from. It's multiple sources, not just one place, which makes sense because this is a very significant quantity of ammunition that is supposed to be able to be delivered in fairly short order. So this is all existing stock. It's not going to be something that has to actually an order placed for procurement or production, because then it wouldn't be coming shortly. So this is moving a lot faster than I expected it to, which is really great, because I was very concerned when the Czechs came out and said this, that Europe was just not going to be decisive in putting up the money, because the United States has no capacity to finance this. There's no USAI funds available for such a purchase, because that's the mechanism by which the United States has been executing these kinds of purchases, because the US has awarded contracts to both Romania and Bulgaria and other countries outside Europe around the world. They've spent USAI funds to procure both standard and non-standard ammunition for Ukraine, but they have no money to do that. So it's on Canada and Europe and Australia and whatever other small number of countries might be willing to kick in some money to buy these shells. So that's a story that definitely should be watched, to see if this contribution in Germany was already accounted for, the figures put forward by the Czech MOD, or if it's on top of that, then we could be pretty close to seeing all of the required funds, and hopefully they can sign a deal very soon, because Ukraine obviously needs that ammunition very, very badly. And if they could start taking receipt of these 800,000 shells, that would make a big difference for the troops on the front line right now.
Do you know of the out of the top of your head, like how many countries have participated? I know Jeff tweeted about it, but I don't have it open right now. So do you know it, or?
I think we're probably around at least half a dozen countries that are publicly involved, and there's some number of countries that are not publicly disclosing that they're involved. So. But yeah, I know Jeff is kind of maintaining a list. I don't have the tweet up right at this moment. I should have gotten that, but I would direct people to our friend Jeff, who does a lot of great work as well on these topics, and he's maintaining a list.
Yeah, when there are actually so many countries involved, I don't think that Germany is part of the 50-60%. It's more on top. My assessment, if there are really so many countries involved, because when Germany financed, I mean, you already said it, we bought in most likely in Bulgaria, like 120,000 shells for 122 ammunition, just one day before the Czech president announced that they have located 800,000 shells, right? And that was already an investment, like in the hundreds of millions of euros. And that comes on top of the to the normal or already planned German artillery ammunition deliveries. I mean, we had secured already like about 80,000, nearly 80,000 shells. Then the 120,000 shells, so it's 200,000, and now we already also announced the participation in the SEC procurement. And I think when I take into account like how much money Germany's every time investing when we are buying stuff for Ukraine, I mean, we spent like 278 million euros in France for 68,000 shells, for example, for Ukraine. I think it's that Germany will at least provide 200-300 million euros to the SEC located shells. So I think that's actually on top.
Okay, gentlemen, I know we could talk about artillery production all day, and we should, but we've got a lot of questions in chat. The good people of chat have waited until the end of the stream, and we should reward them by answering their many, many questions. So I'm going to do sort of like, I guess like a lightning round, or I don't know quite what to call it, but I'll just like direct the questions to who I think is like the most capable of answering, or if they directed it to someone, I'll direct it to them. I might rephrase it slightly just to like get to the heart of the matter, as it were. So we'll just start, and I'll just go through as many as we can. So we'll just start with Shukpui's question. Andrew, have you heard any feedback regarding SAT-Cube by Russian or Ukrainian forces on the front lines?
No.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't heard of SAT-Cube. Definitely hear a lot about Starlink, right? But no, haven't heard anything about SAT-Cube.
I actually can say about SAT-Cube, since I don't know if some other countries delivering them to Ukraine, but Germany does. And the only time I actually saw a SAT-Cube terminal in Ukraine was at a training site, a military training site in Ukraine, so not at frontline use. But Germany is financing them and delivering them like every month. So I think if there would be bad performance or something else like happens, I think we would stop financing them, right? Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Makes sense. Okay, next question is actually for you, Germanade. Chris Jones to Germanade. Finland will be supplying weapons with no restrictions on their use. Will this maybe set a precedent for the rest of Europe, or do you think Germany will hold firm on their position?
I think that, I mean, it was clear that Scholz is very afraid of Ukraine striking on Russian soil, right? I think that won't change. Like German weapons, in my assessment, if that changes in the future, I will be glad. In my opinion, everyone knows that Ukraine should be enabled to strike on Russian targets as much as they want, at least if they are military targets. But I don't think that Scholz ever gives up on his restrictions.
Yeah, I think like what you've illustrated, I think, is that it's a trust issue for Scholz, right? It's his personal decision whether to send it, and for him, it's a trust issue of whether or not Ukraine will shoot a missile into Moscow. And Finland saying they can do whatever they want doesn't really like fix that, right? I think would maybe be a good.
Yeah, maybe for others, but not for Germany. I
Right.
mean,
because it's down to Scholz.
Yeah, it's down to Scholz. I mean, Ukraine, if they really want to do it, they do it. They shoot on Russian targets. I mean, we saw that, for example, with the airframes in Bryansk last year, for example. And I think it was a very great move. Like 5 downed airframes like in one day, right? That's a great impact. But it shows that Ukraine does most of the time, or nearly every time, what Scholz wants. Doesn't use our weapons on Russian soil, but it shows that they are at war, right? I mean, they have their own will and they know what they need to do to win this war. And I think that also shows that if they see an opportunity to have a big impact, either with Taurus or some other weapon system, they will do, and they don't listen to Scholz. And it's good. It's good. I just want to point that out. I'm not complaining. It's very good.
Yeah. And I think you've done a good job like explaining the dynamics there. So if anyone has any questions, of course, you can reach out to Maurice on Twitter. Okay, so next question is also for you, Germanade. Taurus is a company held by MDBA, Germany, and Saab, Sweden. Couldn't Sweden buy some Taurus missiles for Ukraine without Scholz's consent? I'm going to guess no. Go ahead.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we know, for example, that South Korea owns Taurus. We know that Spain owns Taurus. None of these countries, I mean, for South Korea, it's like somewhat understandable since they need them for North Korea. But Spain didn't make any efforts to send them to Ukraine. And if they would, I'm very sure, get a no from Scholz. Although, I mean, it could be binded with Scholz actually agreeing when he just has trust issues, right? And he doesn't want to send them because German soldiers would need to get a mandate, right, from the Bundestag. So it would get publicly known that Germany has troops in Ukraine. I don't know if that applies to for Spain, for example. It would be very interesting. Also for Sweden, Erlend, maybe you can say something about it. I don't know if this would get known, because Scholz could, when he just has trust issues, in my opinion, say, okay, you're allowed to send them to Ukraine, train them on Ukraine, right? If it's not the capability, if it's just the trust that you want to observe it, but you need to send your own troops to observe everything. Like that's, I don't know. Does anybody know if Sweden has these kind of stuff, or Spain, like that you need to publicly announce that you have them in Ukraine?
Jag är inte svenska. I'm not Swedish, but I think MBDA Germany is kind of a separate company under the MBDA umbrella. So I'm not sure if even MBDA and Saab has co-developed the missile. I don't think even the Swedes have any Taurus or any of the production of the actual missile, just subcomponents. Colby, do you know?
Yes, Sweden does not operate Taurus themselves, so there's no technical expertise or technical knowledge of Taurus within the Swedish armed forces that they could provide. And it is unclear to me to what extent even Saab is that involved with Taurus. My understanding is that MBDA is the one that has the production capacity. I don't think that Saab has really any production capacity aside from there maybe components that some of Saab's defense division might provide. But as far as producing new missiles, that is a question for MBDA Germany and a question for the German government to authorize the export of that missile, regardless of who might want to give the missile to Ukraine. It would still have to be authorized by the German government. Spain cannot unilaterally deliver the missile to Ukraine or anybody else without violating the end use terms of that sale agreement.
I have a Swedish tank commander saying to me that they don't have Taurus, they only have Robot 15.
The big question for me is not if they have Taurus. The big question for me is if they need, like Germany, for example, after the Second World War, made sure that the Chancellor, for example, Scholz, can't send troops somewhere else without the parliament, right? So the parliament needs to agree. That's what the Bundestag's mandate is for. They needs to agree that the Bundeswehr goes on deployment in Ukraine, and then it would get publicly known that Germany has soldiers in Ukraine. And that's why Scholz always says that we can't do what the French or what the British are doing, because they can send them without going public, because they don't need that. In Germany, it would get known because it's went by the parliament, and the parliament needs to vote on it. And that's what I was interesting regarding the question. With Sweden, if Sweden buys Taurus from Germany or from the industry, new production, if Scholz said, okay, but you need to make sure that they don't strike outside of Ukraine, if they could send troops to Ukraine to actually do that without going public. That was the question I actually had also regarding Spain, because Spain operates Taurus, right? But yeah,
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is kind of no, right? Like it requires German export permissions, but the long answer is like there's maybe an interesting loophole there based on the idiosyncrasies of how this whole thing is played out, where Germany would have to make troops public and all that. So interesting question. Thank you. The next question is from Kellen Dunn for Colby. Colby, why do you think the U.S. has delayed using the $4 billion in presidential drawdown authority? Can Biden rely on Excess Defense Act to zero out older weapons and provide them to Ukraine under PDA?
Lengthy thread coming on this topic. I wanted to have it done a while ago, but I just did not have time. It's taking a long time to write this, so I'm not going to promise it on a specific date, but it is in work, so stay tuned for that. I mean, you can read what the administration's publicly stated position is, their own explanations. They're not good explanations, as I've been saying, but that'll all come crashing down for them very soon. And they've already started to signal that they're willing to go ahead and use it anyway, which they had already admitted that they had that option, and now it seems to be under active consideration. As for EDA, everybody just needs to forget about EDA. It doesn't do any of the things that people think it does. Doesn't work the way people are claiming it works. Ignore anything written by David Axe. The president does not have the authority to just make up a value of any defense article, excess or not. The valuation process is essentially the same for PDA and EDA. They have specific regulations that dictate how defense articles are valued. So something that is excess does not have a value of zero. It's not how it works. Everything has a value, even if it's excess, even if it's expired, even if it's really old, just not the way it works. And EDA just is not a program that can support Ukraine for the majority of its needs, because most of the things that Ukraine needs from the United States are articles that are definitely not excess to requirements. And even things like the 1200 attack guns, those are not necessarily excess. And as a matter of fact, we knew that they weren't considered excess because they had plans to slap the entire inventory. So you don't slap something that is excess to requirements. So it is not correct to assume that they are excess. My position is that it's irrelevant whether those missiles are excess or not. Ukraine needs them a lot more than the United States does. Therefore, they should be drawn down to be given to Ukraine. So there's ample drawdown authority to still give Ukraine a lot of equipment, because and a lot of the things that Ukraine needs, even though they are not excess, their valuation is still going to be significantly depreciated. The cluster munitions, the DPICMs, for example, those are going to be heavily depreciated because they are so old. So a lot of those can be provided without tapping too much of that remaining authority, because their value is going to be certainly below 50%, probably below 25% if I had to guess. But how exactly what their value is unknown, because the specific regulations is not something that is public as far as I've been able to find. So, but they are heavily depreciated. That much is certain.
And real quick follow-up, Colby. I know you mentioned in the past, I just wanted you to maybe clarify that maybe President Biden could use the seized Russian assets. Could he do that through some kind of executive authority, or would that require congressional? What would be the mechanism by which they could use Russian assets to directly fund maybe weapons or something else?
Yeah, the administration's position is that they require a new law from Congress to set up a framework where that could happen. I think that's a fine position to take. There is such an act already within Congress that can and needs to be passed, called the Repo Act. So my gripe there would be that the administration has not really been forcefully behind that up until fairly recently, and even still, they're not pushing nearly as hard as they really need to be. We're 2 years into the war. This is something that should have been done a long time ago, and Congress was, this was introduced by Senator Risch, who's ranking member on Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a long time ago, and just now the administration is kind of coming around to saying, yeah, we support this, and it's not going to get over the finish line unless they really put all their weight behind it, and President Biden leans on the members of his own party to support that effort as well, because it's something that the ranking member, or excuse me, not the ranking member, the Chairman Cardin on Senate Foreign Relations, he is not somebody that seems to be particularly supportive of this legislation. So it really, really needs the president to put some muscle here and try and lean on his own party members in Congress to support this legislation, and push for European allies as well to do the same, because the vast majority of the money is not located in the United States. It's $300 billion, but only maybe $5 billion is in the United States. Most of it's in Belgian banks. So $5 billion would be great. $300 billion would be a lot better. So it's important that the White House, uses their relationship with European governments to try and get them on side here as well. And I will say there has been a positive development where the president is now saying that he believes that this money should be able to be used for Ukraine's immediate budgetary needs, because the initial thinking was that this money was just going to be used for reconstruction down the road, and that was a completely asinine position, because there will be no Ukraine to reconstruct if Ukraine doesn't win the war, and Ukraine will not win the war unless they have this money, because there's not a whole lot of support in the United States for providing large amounts of budgetary support for Ukraine, not as much as there is for sending weapons. So Ukraine needs some source of money here that they can fund their budget with, because otherwise it's going to be just on the Europeans to provide those funds, because there's not a whole lot of support for that in the United States.
Thank you, Colby. Okay, so then we just have a real quick statement from I solicited sort of French people's opinion on the Macron stuff. So Thierry mentions to us, for Macron, as a French person, I can say two things. First, Macron talks a lot, but he acts not always in accordance, or at least fast enough. And second, there's a true change in the politics of France on Ukraine, with a very heavy rhetoric that talks about no more whatever it takes, but now till Ukraine's victory, right? So there's a shift from like, we'll be in this as long as we have to be, to like, Ukraine's going to win. That change is major in my opinion, and I'm happy to see now that these kinds of discussions are being had. So yeah, I think that's a great comment from Thierry there. And then I should have had like the next question loaded up. Do you see the next question, Erlend?
Well, there was one just recently to Colby. How
Sure.
realistic is it that Mike Johnson ever allows a vote on such legislation? I think it was referred to the seizure of assets.
I think a House vote on the seizure of assets is pretty good. That's something that Johnson has definitely spoken about, that he believes that Russia should pay for this, that American tax dollars preferably should not be used when there's this option of using frozen Russian assets to fund support for Ukraine. So I think that if that legislation gets out of the Senate and goes over to the House, I think a vote on that is pretty good, especially if Congress is able to get all of the annual appropriations passed in the next few weeks, which there's definite movement on getting some of those done, at least some of the less controversial ones to start with. If they manage to get that off their plate, then that will free up the legislative calendar to try and get some of these other bills through Congress. So I'm definitely more optimistic about that. If the White House pushes hard, because it's still not even out of the Senate yet. So that's step one.
Colby, I think this is also a question for you. Italy announced it's taking back a SAMP-T in Slovakia. Do you think Italy will give this system to Ukraine instead? Have you heard anything about that?
I have no reason to believe that Italy will give that SAMP-T to Ukraine. Ukraine is obviously pushing both France and Italy very hard for additional SAMP-T systems. I think that they should definitely give Ukraine additional SAMP-T systems, but I have no clue whether that is something that is likely or not. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks, guys. I think that's like all the questions from chat. So thanks again, chat. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have something. First, Nectron said if Biden removed the restriction on not shooting on Russian soil, Scholz might reconsider. He won't reconsider for everyone else. First, I absolutely 100% agree with you on he won't reconsider for anyone else. I think it's pretty clear, like also with the Leopard topic, for example, that if someone can change his mind, or if there is someone where he looks up to, it's Biden. So I think if someone can move him to actually get the restrictions off, it would be Biden. But the big problem, or the questions I have, is does it really make a change? Because, okay, it's a political statement. Yes, you can shoot on Russian soil, but how likely is it if we don't give Taurus, right? I mean, the farthest reaching weapon systems and ammunition we have given is Mars 2, right? With how long do the missiles reach? Like 100 kilometers, 90, 80, something like this. And the Panzerhaubitze with the Volcano rounds, right, which have like 74 kilometers, I believe, in range. So it wouldn't really make a big difference if he said, okay, without actually giving Taurus, right? And I think that's also for the Finns. I mean, it's a very good statement, yes, but does it really change anything? I really don't think so. And second, with the Taurus, when he actually gives up Taurus to Ukraine and he says you can shoot anything on Russia, right? He wants. I don't think that Scholz actually would say, okay, you can strike the Kremlin, I don't care, right? And so it basically in the end would still come down to trust issue and control mechanisms, because like someone would need to control if if the Ukrainians are programming the missiles to other targets than the Kremlin, for example, right? So it really wouldn't make a difference, to be honest. But you're completely right about Biden. And then you, Joseph, actually forgot about one question from Kellen at the beginning. I tried to scroll up. Yeah, here. To germinate, what are your thoughts on the Taurus Conversation League? Why is Scholz reluctant to provide it? Is it
I
because
did
of
it for you.
you left that? Yeah. Oh, that's cute. No, it's fine. Like I said, I really don't want to talk about the topic. But if anyone has questions, which I can totally understand, then I will, of course, answer them to the best of my ability. So my thoughts, I already talked about it. Like there were, and also Erlend said it. It's not, let's say, it's not very good in terms of foreign policy, right? To our partner nations, especially to Great Britain, the US, and France. Apart from that, like there were some very, very good statements made, like that they're trusting the Ukrainian Air Force or the Ukrainian army in general, that they're impressed. Named, I said it before, especially named was the performance of the Patriot batteries in Ukraine, like how they are operating them, that they are very, very impressed by it. That's my personal thoughts on the leak. Of course, it need to be. They need to clarify how this happened. I mean, there are already some theories out there, but I don't want to comment on them since nothing is officially confirmed yet. But things need to change in case that actually happened that way it is reported right now, and that's not good. So to address your question, and then I got one per DM on Twitter. Does the ammo, talking about the SEC ammo, right? Does the ammo get shipped or by plane to, let's say, Poland as the money is raised and transferred? Do you think? Yes. Please correct me, someone, if someone knows something else. But I think that everything goes through Poland right now. Poland is, besides Germany, the logistical key in Europe regarding Ukraine aid, right? I mean, Germany, for example, had near the Polish border like 20, 30 kilometers besides the checkpoint where all the aid gets shipped over. We had stationed 3 Patriot batteries, for example, to protect everything in this area. So I think the majority or everything else gets delivered through Poland. Yeah, and I think that should answer the question, and that's for everything I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Terminator to Ukraine, for catching the couple of questions I missed there. Okay, so I think we do have Daniela joining us. So I did want to give you opportunity, Daniela. You, of course, do work on some artillery production stuff and some drone stuff. I know you're hard at work in the data mines. So I'm just curious if you have an update for folks, or if you wanted to add anything, or we'll leave you alone to get back to work.
Oh, thank you, Joseph. Thank you. Well, what I can say is that in terms of FPV usage, as many have seen by the latest update that I released a few days ago, we have observed a great increase in FPV usage against infantry from Ukrainian side, but also Russian have increased these as well. But the good news is that at least from the data that we have, we see an advantage in this sector on Ukrainian side. Now, on vehicles, as you're showing now, we still have usual, I would say, performance, and this, of course, is also a symptom of the major strategies from Ukrainian, which point to try to attire and consume as much armored vehicle, but also logistical vehicle, because when I say vehicles, I include BMP, BTR, tanks, trucks, and if you follow Andrew, he will post quite often every day um, the count of the losses, and you will see that some days there are a lot of logistical vehicles. So and this is important because what they are trying to do, especially in a moment where the shells are essentially a very rare resource, they are trying to slow down and remove the momentum to the Russian forces by removing their logistic and their supplies, which is honestly a good way to do that. But if a year and a half, 2 years, nearly 1 year ago, this was done using HIMARS, destroying ammo depot, now is done by destroying trucks, so making impossible or much more complex for the Russian to bring the ammunition. A few days ago, we also saw one of the first evidence um, of of some traps laid by drones to destroy just the wheel of the trucks, and these were essentially um, um, very big nails weld together. I don't remember the technical name, but was they were pretty effective. So in terms of strike composition, instead, we still have pretty much an advantage of the Russian. But what was very important this month was the change in the way on how we classify and how also I count everything. So you can see there is a very large increase. Probably this is not that big. Maybe it has been dramatic since the beginning, but we can see that for sure Ukraine started at the very end to point also on Russian defenses position, and I'm going soon to release another a work on this in order to show how this affected effectively the trenches. Because one of the in these stats I didn't publish this, but nearly 70% of all the FPV strike on position is done against trenches, and these are the only those that we see. There are many others that we don't see, and trenches has become the trench has become a very dangerous place at the moment, if it wasn't already before. Yeah, this is the video of the how you call these Erlend?
Caltrops.
Oh, Altrops. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty effective and cheap way of destroying a wheel of a car or a truck, and this can delay the delivery of ammunition of a day or even more. So I think we will see more and more solution like this, which should not be seen as like desperate solution. These are adaptation of a system which is an FPV drone or a drone. In this case, it could be done by a classical quadcopter, but essentially this is a way on adapting the um, the platform to the situation on the ground. And the last was, I think, yes, this one essentially confirm a quadratic behavior. So it's going to grow very fast. And my suspect is that these could become even more steep as growth, maybe exponential. And this is a bad news for Andrew and Geek, unfortunately, because this will mean that there will be many more videos and information to be filtered and processed. And the reason why this increase, of course, is because both sides knows of the importance of FPV drone. But luckily, at least on Ukrainian side, we know that there are a lot of volunteer, but also companies working in this field and working effectively in with the innovation, with also a work plan in mind. A week ago or 2 weeks ago, we interviewed Alex from Wild Hornet, and this is just one of the many organization, completely volunteering group that is doing a great job in innovating also. In terms of global, yes, you can see how many drones has been used, and this is if you do the 30% in terms of because many people repeat that the efficiency of one drone is 30%. So this is just the 30%. So there is another 70% of that total, which we don't see because maybe they have missed, because maybe the target didn't blow up. Honestly, most of the video that I had the chance to look at, for example, on tanks or even BMP, many times or are abandoned and then are finished. So it's a clear, consequence of something that happened before. Or many times I see, one shot, one kill. But from what we heard is 30% the efficiency of FPV drone generally.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Erlend.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Andrew, are job applications being received at the moment for geolocation?
Do you need help in the basement, Andrew?
I mean, the basement's pretty big. We have some chains and some desks.
Does Gik bite?
We have some standing desks. Whether he bites or not is irrelevant because the chains aren't long enough, But yeah, if you'd like to help, we recently got a third member of the team, which was cool, and it'd be nice to have like 2 more, so we don't all go crazy.
Daniela has been breaking down a few videos for you, though.
Yeah. I consider that an internship, the student that do the thesis and then fly away in another lab. But no, I will continue to do this as much as I can, but I can ensure that if you want to do this, get prepared to learn a lot and also to look a lot of videos. And honestly, this is personally the thing that takes the most, because sometimes it's sad, especially when you have to look at trenches. Trenches is even worse than looking at vehicles, because most of the time trenches are aiming to the content of the trenches. Yeah, sorry for this digression, but this work is invaluable, important, because especially in the region that now you are surfing, Erlend, that region has been covered very much, and from FPV strike and surveillance drone you can understand the situation on the ground decently well. And then if you combine this with the videos from the soldier who patrolled that area, you can get a glimpse of the nightmare that have to be to man a trench in that exact area that you are looking at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I actually pulled up the map is because I wanted to ask Andrew if he has any things that he wants to say about the latest days. But I at least want to mention that yesterday Odessa was hit with Shahed strike, wasn't it yesterday?
Yeah.
And it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah, they found even more children today in the rubble. I believe the boy they found today was 10 years old. They've already found a 4-month-old, an 8-month-old, I think a 3-year-old. It was a very large number of children who were killed in the collapse of the building after it got hit by a Shahed, including almost entire families. So there's one family where the mother and all of the children were killed, and another family where the father and all of the children were killed.
Yep.
Yeah. There's also been strikes in Myrnograd and in Pokrovsk. Those were last night. I haven't mapped them yet. And there's also been strikes in Kharkiv and Kupiansk, all over. There's been tons. They're using more weapons in more locations. Like, we haven't seen as many Shaheds striking these smaller towns like Veliki Burluk, which is where you're looking now. There was a Shahed attack the other day. They often hit there with airstrikes, but Shahed was kind of new. They haven't really done that. But yeah, there's just been It's been a lot. This morning I was feeling kind of frisky, and I drew a lot more shelling reports in Kherson than I usually do. I didn't do all of them because there were like 100, but I did do like 30 or something. I don't know, but yeah, there's been a lot of shelling. There's a lot of shelling every single day. I do have a separate database for shelling that I don't really share with many people. There's maybe like 5 people who can look at it, but that database has around 300,000 shelling reports by now. I've been filling that database since around March of 2022. So there's been a few hundred a day.
And to be clear, that's not one artillery shell, it's several fire missions.
Yeah, it can be anywhere from one fire mission to a whole day's worth. It depends, because it's each one is a report. So the report can be, today 1 artillery shell landed in our town, or sometimes it's like in Kyiv. I remember one report said we were shelled for 23 hours straight today. I think they were hit by like thousands of shells in a single day in one city. So yeah, it depends. So not all of the reports are made equal, but yeah, there's hundreds a day basically, especially earlier in the war, when the front line was much larger. There are so many reports. Like you'd be like 50 in Kyiv, it would be like 50 in Sumy. Like every single oblast would have like a whole bunch. But now the front line is smaller. Like Chernihiv and Kyiv and those areas, they don't really get shelled very much anymore. They do occasionally, but not that much. Sumy has been heating up, which is I don't really like seeing that. There was one day recently where Sumy had just dozens and dozens of shelling reports in one day. I believe they said they were hit by 3,000 artillery shells over like a 4-day period or something like that, which is a lot of artillery shells for an oblast that is not the front line. There's really no active fighting. It's just shelling random houses and farms. They've been taking out a lot of farms recently. There have been some videos where the farms were actually legitimate targets. Like they hit an air defense the other day that was in a farm building, and it ended up killing 2 police officers, and it took out that book. So that was actually a legitimate target, but also they just hit random farms just like for fun or whatever. Like they take out grain. They've destroyed enormous amounts of grain. So yeah, it's really disappointing seeing how shelled Sumy has been getting recently. And there's always like this idea that they use Sumy as a place to train in order to send guys to active combat areas. And it makes me wonder, what does it, if they're training, what does it mean when they suddenly start shooting tons of artillery? Or maybe it just means nothing. I don't really know. But yeah, there's tons to talk about. There's always tons of things happening in this war that most of it goes unreported. On my map, I have been noting some sapper related information, like that one yellow triangle in the western part of Ukraine. That was they were disposing an X-101 warhead that crashed in a random farm. It amuses me that an X-101 just kind of crashes every once in a while.
It's a Russian missile, Andrew?
Yeah, that is their cruise missile that they use in their large missile strikes. They're dropped by their heavy bombers. But yeah, they've had a lot of duds in those missiles. I think this one may have, I don't know if this was shot down. Maybe it just crashed. I don't know. It's like in a really rural, remote place. So maybe it was shot down by like an airplane. I don't know. But they've had a bunch of duds where the missile hit their target but didn't explode. which is kind of interesting to me. Just just as a curiosity. I don't really know if that means anything. I'm sure every weapon has duds, but they've had a bunch of X-101 duds, which it feels particularly bad for these missiles to be a dud because they're so expensive and they make their usage such a big deal, you know? So having them be a dud just tickles me. But yeah, I've been marking sappers. I use the yellow triangles as the for sapper information, but also just for the yellow triangle is just like things I think you should read.
Oh yeah, Andrew. Shukpui asked, do we know where the Shaheeds that strike Odessa come from? Is it? I know Crimea for a while, but is that still the case?
Yeah, I think so. I think they come from Crimea. I think they also shoot some from Kursk or whatever, but those come from the other angle. They usually target like Kyiv or Kharkiv or whatever, or Zhytomyr. Sometimes they, or Rivne. You know, they when they go west. Yeah, I actually haven't been tracking the Shaheeds much lately. There's a really nice Twitter account that tracks the Shaheeds, and it saves me a lot of time. It's actually really nice not having to do it. I recommend everybody follows that guy because he's pretty cool. And he just
Shahed Tracker, right?
Yeah, Shahed Tracker. Yeah, I think everybody should follow him. He's great.
Sounds like a stand-up guy.
Yeah, he just tracks Shaheeds. It's he started tracking missiles too.
Nice.
Although there hasn't been a missile strike lately, although I bet there will be this week.
Okay, guys. Well, we're running over pretty substantially here. Erlend, is there anything else we want to cover, or should we wrap up?
I think we can wrap up.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in this week. We really appreciate everyone listening. I think having Andrew on seems to have boosted our numbers a bit. So we thank all the Andrew people for stopping by. Please do subscribe to Tochnyi as a channel, like the stream. We really appreciate you guys spreading the word about us. We're just all volunteers. We just want to try to spread as much accurate information about what's going on in Ukraine as possible, and of course support Ukraine in repelling Russia from their sovereign territory. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you to our panel for all your great contributions. It was great discussing all this stuff with you guys. A lot of news this week, so it was a lot to get through. So thank you for your endurance and your insights. And we'll see everyone next week. I don't think we have a picture of the week. Maybe Caltrops can be picture of the week. Jonathan usually has the picture of the week. We should have asked him about it. So we'll just maybe do Caltrops or this, the togetherness of us all together here is maybe the picture of the week. Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. Like and subscribe. And we'll see everyone next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Героям слава.
On behalf of the brave.